In this video, we are going to cover the basics of Maya materials and go into some detail about how the node structure works in Autodesk Maya. So the first thing for this particular exercise is you need to create some objects to manipulate. I generally just do a series of spheres and cubes for this exercise, but you can technically use anything. Some people will make random shapes that have lots of interesting curves. Anything you want to make will work, but for this we're just going to do simple spheres and cubes. So I'm going to start off by making some spheres and cubes. I'm assuming that you have the basic understandings of Maya in the case of navigation and those things as well. If not, some of these things, those properties are lost, those things are lost to you. Just refer back to the other videos. So I'm going to create a sphere, create polygon sphere, primitive sphere, and I'm going to go ahead and create one here. And I'm going to go ahead and also maybe create cubes as well. Create polygon primitive cube. And again, we can manipulate these if you want them to be precise by going into the inputs of the object in the channel box and changing these numbers to match. And so I have this perfect cube that's just 3 units. I just chose an arbitrary amount. And maybe I'll make the sphere also 3 units. So that doesn't quite right. Well, it's radius, so it's not a diameter. 1.5. That's closer. But you know what? I actually liked it a little bit bigger. So I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 2. So I have the sphere and this cube. I'm lining them up on the ground plane by looking in the front or side view and just kind of putting them. I'm just using this darker line to justify, a ground plane. And then what I'm going to do is just because I like to make for presentation, try to make it as clean as possible. And the top view, I'm going to snap them to a grid just so I know they're lined up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both objects. And in this case, because I'm in the top view, I'm going to grab the blue arrow and I'm moving them. But if I hold down the X key when I move them, they will snap to a grid. And then we'll snap to a certain grid. And if I want, I can do this the other direction as well, but it's honestly not as important in this direction, but I'll do it anyway. So I just held down X and then grab the other arrow. So again, holding down X key is your grid snap. It's your quick key for grid snap. And I'm just kind of snapping them together. Now, these 2 objects are fine. I'm probably not going to do all of them, but let's say if I want to let 5 more out. Maybe I'll go ahead and move these in the center. Let's say I want 5 more out. What I can do is I can duplicate these. Control D, have them selected, Control D. I'm going to move them a little bit. And then I can hit Shift D to repeat that duplication, or I can just do it again. So it's not a big deal either way. So hit Shift D, and you see it duplicates it again. So go the other direction to showcase this. Control D, holding down X to snap, to grid snap, and then I'm going to hit Shift D. And as long as it's the last thing that you do, you will always keep the spacing the same. If you start doing other operations, you can't do the Shift D trick, where it inherits the translation, rotation, or the scale. You have to basically hit Control D and do your duplication all over again. But you can, as you can see, if you do it right away, you can duplicate those out. Now, it's also a good idea, because later on you're probably going to put lights and shadows on this, to make an actual ground plane. So this is how I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and create a polygon plane. So I'm going to go up to create polygon primitive plane, drag a box. I can be very arbitrary with this. And I want to have, just because I don't want to be doing renders with solid black in the background, like, that's the arm renderer. Hold on 1 second. I don't want to be doing with solid black in the background because it's going to be hard to really judge your values, especially if you have black inside your textures on your materials. So I definitely want to, have a background of some kind. Now we could easily just duplicate a plane or make another plane and just rotate it and put it back there. But what I'm going to do, just for this case of showing you other ways of doing things, is I'm going to go ahead and select this edge in edge mode. And again, to get in subcomponent mode for any object, you right-click and hold on it, and you go to the subcomponent mode you want to go. So again, I'm right-clicking and holding on the polygon plane here. I'm going to edge mode. That just activates edge mode. Now I'm going to select this edge. And we've talked about in the tool series, just various tools, and one of them was Extrude. And I'm just going to use the Extrude tool to bring this edge up. So to bring up an edge, in edge mode with Extrude is just select the edge that you want and hit Control E. Normally we do this with face, but I'm showing you how to do this with edges. And that's all I'm doing, just bringing up that edge. So I'm making a back wall like that. Now, if you want that solid, when you're done, you can just switch to object mode or just click off of it. If you want that solid line there, that's absolutely fine. Or you could, if you want to, you could come in there, maybe bevel that and get that to be softer if you want. I'm just going to leave it for as is right now. And again, you can just scale this as needed. So you can see this is kind of my idea here, making this little stage for these cubes and spheres to sit on. That way, and all I have to do is just extend this more, scale it, so I can have this not have a completely opaque black background. Right now it's just all gray, but you want to put something there, because again, if you don't, especially if you do darker material textures for your test, it's going to be harder to read them, and it's going to be harder to read the lights and shadows on them as well. So only time you use the solid black background is because, remember, that denotes transparency by default, is if you're doing like video compositing or compositing a render into something else. That's just a suggestion that you put something back there. So our stage is set. It might be a good idea to save at this point. In fact, I might as well go ahead and do that right now. File, save scene as. I normally would talk about making projects. On this one, I think I'm just going to save out just a random scene here. I'm just going to call this Maya Materials. I'm just going to save it to the desktop in my case, because I'm going to do this all in one go. Yeah, I'll talk about that later at the end. So I'll do it wrong, or what I would classify as wrong first, and then I'll show you what is the potential problems that you might run into if you do not create a Maya project. So I need to get materials on all these. We talked about materials in some other videos, but the basics still stand. What I need is every one of these objects to have a different material, because I don't intend to have any of them sharing a material. I would recommend sticking to Lamberts, blends, or Fongs. I would probably put the most emphasis on blends, to be completely honest, for this test series. So let's go ahead and add some materials to this. For example, on this background, I'm going to go ahead and right-click and hold. And I'm going to assign a new material, our favorite material. Either one will work. I'm going to assign a new Lambert to this, because I don't want the ground to be shiny. And again, you can see it comes up. If you want to go into the attribute editor, click on the tab, or you can simply just right-click on this, go Material Attributes. You can bring up the attributes of this background. Now I'm just going to call this ground just so it has a name. It's a good idea to name things, especially if you know what it's going to be. If you're not quite sure yet, then it's understandable, but you should try to name things as you go. And all I did was I clicked in this area and started typing, and it would create a name. So I'm going to give this a different color. I'm pretty partial to myself to like a dull, desaturated green for my backgrounds, but you can choose anything you want. So just something not gray. Gray is fine, actually. Gray is great, but for the purpose of this exercise, the idea is to put materials on things, so just pick something different other than gray. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing for each one of these. And I think I'm going to stick to blends for like all of these, I think, just to keep it simple. And I'm not going to bother renaming those materials yet, because I don't know what they're going to be. Again, this is very exploratory. So I'm going to just go through these one by one. And I like to call this clowning them up, or I'm just assigning temp materials to things. And I'm just going to go right-click on each one of these one at a time and go Assign Favorite Material, Blend. And then I'm just going to give it a random color, because it pops up immediately. So I'm going to take advantage of that, give it a random color. It doesn't matter what. We're going to replace all these later. Next one, Assign Favorite Material, Blend. And I'm going to give it a random color. And just like before, you can use the G key to repeat last use operations. So now I'm just, instead of assigning, since I'm going to make these all blends, I just hit the G key with something selected and assigned a new blend to it. So now that's all I'm going to do from now this point forward to make this quicker. So you can use the G key. Watch here. Right now it has Lambert 1 on it. Hit the G key. Now it has blend 4. So it's creating a brand new blend to add there. And again, G key just repeats your last use function. Doesn't matter. G. Again, that's what I call clowning up the temple. Or sorry, the picture, the image. Let's do red. And it doesn't matter if the colors are kind of the same, to be completely honest. If you kind of start getting something that are close, like these are both very close green, that's fine. Again, we're just trying to get something on there so you know that that is not something that needs to be replaced. So I'm going to go through and keep hitting the G key. And changing the random colors here in this section over here to get this kind of thing going. So last one here, blend 10, as you can see. There we go. So I have 10 blends now on these objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin to explore different kinds of texturing and material operations that you can do on these materials. So we're going to replace the simplistic color blends that we did with something else. So that's what what we're going to be covering mostly in this lecture. So I'm just going to start with this cube over here. It doesn't matter which one you start with. Certain things might read better than others, and you can try that. But I'm going to go ahead and go to blend 1 now. And again, you can either select it by going into the attribute editor and selecting the appropriate tab, in this case blend 1, or you can right click on the object and go to material attributes. That'll open up the material attributes automatically. And you can see in here we have the basic material attributes as well as some special effects ones and things like that. So quickly to go down this list again, we already kind of manipulated color. As you can see, it messes with the color of the object. Transparency is if it's transparent or not, if you want it to be see-through. Ambient color deals with shadows. I'll back up to this one after. I'll back up to this one in a little bit. Actually, I'm going to go through this list first. So ambient color, what it is though, is it is what the color is on the darker side of the object, the shadowed side, I guess is the best term for that. Where it's if it's in shadow, what does the ambient side look like? So the darker that is, the more likely your shadow, or that shadow is just going to be solid black, which is what the default is. Honestly, in the real world, that's not how it is. They just in 3D, they just tend to make everything either absolute white, absolute black, or 50% gray. That's like the 3 colors they pick whenever they do their settings on anything. But a lot of times we don't want these default settings at all. Incandescence is the material's way of trying to fake light, like an incandescent light. By default, at least with the Maya software, this does not render actually generating light. I can't recall on Arnold, I'd have to double check that, but in Maya software it does not generate light, so it's kind of a fake, but you can set up rendering engines to actually behave like that. You can turn on incandescence, give it a color, and it would glow and emit light. Again, I don't think the default settings are like that, so I'd have to cover that in a rendering video, but for now that's what incandescence does. What it would do for your case without setting up that render, you could fake incandescence. But other than that, I wouldn't recommend it until we cover more rendering in detail. Bump mapping is amazing, but that's going to get its own section lecture. But what it is off the, as the broad sense is what it does is it uses some sort of texture to mimic and a light to mimic geometry that's not actually there. So you can actually fake geometry by using some sort of input, like a texture node or something like that, and light to kind of fake things. It's really good for like surface detail if you want to add like cracks on something or little grooves or anything like that. That's a great way to fake those things without actually having to model them out. So I'll show you how to do that. Diffuse. Diffuse is how much a material holds onto its color in darkness. So things with high diffuse tend to not lose their color as fast when there's less light in the scene. I'm not going to say like construction equipment where it's reflective, but you know, like the rubber cones for construction, where the parts that are not reflective, are things like that. They have a high diffuse value. Things that have a low diffuse value tend to be things like metal. They tend to lose their color really fast as it gets dark. Think of like some red cars that you might see, like a really nice red car. It looks really red in noonday sun, but as soon as you get later at night, it begins to lose its color quite fast. Metal tends to have a low diffuse. It tends not to keep its color the darker it gets in the lighting situation. The default set to 0.8. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to try to judge your scene when you make materials as if everything's being made in the noonday sun, and then adjust from there. So you just have to kind of have a little kind of have to think a little further. And if you do take that time to think like, oh, diffuse, I want it to get darker faster, your materials will adapt to changes in lighting in scene. So I think again, the complicated scene, instead of making something dark red because you're making a night scene, if you actually made the red car have a low diffuse but be brighter, if the car was driving in the day or night, if you like used it somewhere else in an animation, it would adapt accordingly, and you wouldn't have to change the colors. So that's just a little more slightly advanced thinking on the diffuse, but by all means, like I said, you can kind of just keep that in the back of your mind and play with it as you go. Translucence I don't use too much. It's to mimic like things like candle wax. I generally don't use the default translucence here. I would recommend like a specialty tutorial for that. So if you want to play with translucence, you go ahead. But I'm not gonna dive in that on this lecture series, just because that's deserving of its own lecture series itself. Specularity. Specularity is these shiny highlights on the objects. You can see them more on the spheres here. The eccentricity is how broad I'm on the wrong object here. Let's do this one. Let's do how broad or how narrow the highlight is. So you can see, the tighter the highlight or the larger it is. And then specular roll off is kind of like I would call this transparency basically for the highlight. And the color is the actual color. And again, it defaults to 50% gray, as I mentioned earlier. Specular highlights. Here's a little tip for you. If the object that you're creating is plastic, no matter what color plastic it is, the highlight is always white. Doesn't matter if it's red plastic, blue plastic, black plastic, the highlight is white. If you're doing metal, and it depends on the metal and a lot of other conditions, but if you're doing metal, the metal tends to have a highlight that mimics the color of the metal, but it's almost always very close to white as well. But it does tend to have a little bit of color of that metal in there. Especially if it's like brushed metal or something, then it'll actually wear down the specular highlight, thus you'll see more of the color in the specular highlight. So for example, this is green plastic. I'm done. It's a white highlight, but let's say if I wanted to make this look slightly more metallic, I can throw a little bit of the green into this highlight here by clicking on this little swatch here. Brings it up. My computer's a little on the slow side, and I'm just going to throw a little bit of green in there, and you can see there's a green specular highlight on there versus the purple one that has a white highlight. So this is almost near white, but just a touch of green in there. And it generally will mimic metallic surfaces a little bit better. So that's a little tip for you guys. If you're doing some sort of metal, try to put a little bit of the color of that metal in there. Reflectivity. If we were to render this in certain rendering engines, again, we talk about different renderers, software versus Arnold. We're going to be using software mostly for this one. But if you were using Arnold renderers or renderers that support reflectivity, this property would control that. So what reflectivity is how much something reflects. Is it a mirror? Is it not? 0.5 by default is pretty darn high if you ask me, but again, they just kind of went for the middle ground and did that. You probably don't have to worry about this attribute with this exercise, but again, if you start rendering things out and maybe you are using the Arnold renderer, because you could do this with the Arnold renderer. This reflectivity attribute can be toned down to help reduce how reflective it is. What are you seeing inside of it? Again, that's more advanced rendering. That's definitely another whole topic series. So some of these properties are more basic, and some of them I would classify as, you know, again, time for another lecture series. All right, so that is the basics of of the um, of the materials there. Um, the Lamberts, for example, do not have a specular highlight. That's the difference between them. So I click on my ground plane, which I made a Lambert. It only has the first ones. And blends have a specular highlight. Phong, which I didn't make any, um, they have a specular highlight as well, but the shader was written different because it was a different author. So it just has slightly different properties. It's real easy just to play with it and figure out kind of how it works. As for Fongs and blends, they're both legacy materials at this point, as of this recording of this video, I would say. But blends are a little bit more popular still. But the difference between Phong and blend is Fongs kind of starts out looking like metal, but can be easily edited to look like plastic. And blends start out looking like plastic, but easily can be edited to look like metal if you spend a little bit of time on them. So they're very similar. That's why I said most people kind of, for whatever reason, blend seems to be the more popular one. I've seen at least, but you know, either one is fine. Okay, so now those are the basics, and just you can play with these numbers to mess with these things. But that's only scratching the surface, and that really not what this video is about. You can play with those numbers real quickly and get into a lot of things. But what we really want to focus on in this video is what's called the input connection. So anywhere to the right of these properties in here, technically anywhere in Maya, we call this an input connection. They look like little checker boxes inside, right next to the property. So for example, color has this swatch that you can click on and manipulate the color. It has a value slider, which you can mess with the brightness, and it has an input connection. Anytime you click on the input connection, that means there's lots more options, and those options will replace whatever you have here. So if I click on this will no longer be green. It'll be something else entirely. And that's largely what we're going to be talking about. So let's go ahead and do this for those that are following along. Let's click on the input connection, and you're going to get a list, massive list. And again, as I said, I can't cover all these things in the span of these video series. But we can break it down and cover the more basic ones here. Again, the intro to materials here. This list contains a lot of different things, and some specialty ones depending on what kind of renders you have in here. But we're going to be focusing on 2D textures and 3D textures. So these two right here, if you want to narrow down the list, you can see I can click on these and filter through them. Now, 2D textures use something called UVs, which is a coordinate space that how a 3D program wraps around a texture or some sort of 2D image around a 3D object. I like to use the example of clothing being designed and then sewn together, then someone puts it on. That's kind of how a 2D texture wraps around a 3D object. Think of it like like wrapping paper or clothing getting wrapped around a 3D object. 3D textures are like a projector. So what you would do is you would make a projector, and it would literally shine on the object and technically through the object based on a 3D projector that you would put in your world. Think of it like a projector inside a classroom. This projector is used on the ceiling. It projects on a wall. The exact same idea. It's a projector. I would say 2D textures are definitely the more common ones in the end, but we're gonna start out with some 3D textures in this lecture. So, again, I'm not going to be able to cover all these, but let's go ahead and pick one or two of these to start out with to get going. I'm going to pick 3D texture, and I'll go ahead and pick marble and try this one out here for you guys. Now, whenever you do a 3D texture, the first thing I want to note that it's going to create that projector that I mentioned in your scene. So you have to be on a lookout for that. And by default, Maya always puts the projector at the origin, the 0, 0, 0 space. So if you have things in your scene, just know that it might be buried underneath there. So I'm going to go ahead and click on marble. It replaced that green. And you can see, maybe you can't, but there's that projector right there. If you hit the 4 key on your keyframe and go wireframe, it might be easier to find that projector. If you navigate around, there's that green box. Or, as you can see, it does put up the projectors in the outliner for you to grab. And you can see what's happening. There's nothing here. I've turned gray, but I don't see anything. So 4 is wireframe preview, 5 is shaded, 6 is to preview with textures. So as soon as I hit the 6 key on my keyboard, and I just hovered my mouse on the screen and hit the 6 key, I am now previewing with textures. And you can see that this marble green turned into the marble. But this is now a texture. It will not show up on the 5 key, only the 6 key. So that's the difference between the 5 and the 6. Now, this has a 3D projector in it. If I grab this projector and move it, it will manipulate this, which is actually to our advantage. We can move this around, we can rotate it, we can even scale this up and down to affect this. We can put this wherever we want. It doesn't really matter what you do with it. Just kind of move it around to kind of mess with this. So you have 2 levels of control. You have the projector, which I'm playing with, and you also will have the texture, which I haven't got into yet. You'll have its properties as well. So I can scale this up or down or whatever I want to mess with this. I'm pretty sure you can hide this and not break your projection. If you want to get it out of the way. To hide something in Maya, you select the object and you hit Control H. And you can see it's hidden now in the outliner. To bring an object back, you select the object and you hit Shift H. These can be found under the display. If you like menus better, display, hide selection, and show selection. And I generally select them in the outliner. The outliner is a great tool to keep open. Again, the outliner is this little box list format on the left-hand side. You can technically drag this as a tear off. I just open it up and keep it open because the outliner is just a great tool to keep open. So that's the projector. That's the last I'm going to talk about that. You can move it around, do things with it. Technically, you can even delete it, and I think you'll be fine, but then you lose that control. I generally just hide it once I've got it placed somewhere. The next thing is obviously the material itself. We talked about how we have 2 levels of control. We have the projector and we have the texture. So if I go back to the blend, you'll see that the color is no longer green, which was what I started with, and it has this little arrow that points to the right. I'm going to turn my specular color not to be green anymore because it doesn't make any sense. Alright, so but I have this little arrow. Whenever you see this little arrow here, that means there's an input. Something's controlling this. That means whatever is making it look like this is down this way. So it's kind of like a street sign. If you click on this, you get directions like, okay, let's go see what's causing this. So if I click on this little arrow pointing into the box, it'll take me to whatever node is affecting that color channel, the first in the list. And we only have one in the list right now, and that is the marble. So we have the marble, and you got to pay attention to your tabs up here. Sometimes there's a lot of properties, but in this case it's the right one. It's what I want, is the marble. But sometimes you might accidentally like, oh, what is this? I don't know what that was. The projector. This is the projector right here. This is where it is, and here is the actual material of the marble. So there's some properties here, and these will not be the same. Every time I get into a different setting, it's going to be different. But default marble material here has a filler color of white, a vein color of like this red, a vein width, diffusion, and contrast. And again, what you want to do is you want to start messing with just these properties. Do I want to make this like a really dark volcanic looking material here, and then maybe make the vein color a little bit brighter. I'm going this like volcano looking thing. Maybe I'll make the vein width a little bit thinner. So it's more that. Decrease the diffusion. Whatever you want to do. Like I said, in this case, it's easier just to mess with the properties to see what they do. Vein width controls the width of the vein, kind of self-explanatory. Diffusion is how much contrast there is between those elements. And contrast is actually, contrast. But diffusion is kind of like how much those colors go into each other, I guess would be more accurate determination. And contrast is literally contrast. So you can see you can play with these and get something different like that. And you know what? The specular highlight's actually annoying me. I'm going to tone down my specular highlight or make it much more, closer to that. So like you see, I can play with that color a little bit. And all I did was to do that is I went back to the specular highlight and toned down the eccentricity in this particular case. And I even made it a little bit red, even though it's not metal. Maybe I'll just make it black and get rid of it completely. All right, so there you go. You can see there's a blend that kind of looks more like a Lambert now. And I have this marble material on here. And again, what I'm doing, whenever I want to get to it, I go to the attributes, color, the arrow. You can see there's some properties. But here's where things start to get real interesting. Is you'll notice that this marble has inputs as well. And this is where things start getting crazy, cool, but yet also confusing for beginners. Is that means I can replace one of these things with another property. It's really easy to kind of judge like the black or the red in this case because it's color. It's a little harder to say, oh, I'm gonna throw something in the vein width or the diffusion or the contrast. But I do recommend that you try some things out. But I'm going to go ahead, for the purpose of explaining this, do vein color. So again, if I do input vein color, it's not going to be red, it's going to be something else. And this time, maybe, once again, I'll stick to 3Ds for now. I will do, this is going to look awful, but I'll do it anyway. I'll choose solid fractal. And once again, as you see, it's going to make another projector, which I'm just going to hide. I don't want to mess with it at all. And I have a solid fractal in place of the red, which I don't know if this looks good or not. Personally, I don't think it does. But you can see as I navigate back to the marble, there's an input now to the fractal. Click on that input, and you can see I can mess with this and maybe try different things. I'm like, it's not really looking too good. Let me try some different things here. And this is generally how you honestly get the best at using the software. It's just just get the properties, try different things. Like I said, I'm just trying to keep you organized so that you understand how to create these links and how to delete the links. But when you actually play with the materials, it's going to take a bit of time. Now, I didn't like anything this did. Let's say I don't see what this is doing, which in this case it's not doing too much because there's not enough area for it to play with. I just don't like it. That's fine. I want to get rid of it. I want to go back to the red or something else. I hate it. That's fine. This is how we get rid of it. So if we go back to the root of the material, if I want to get rid of the entire thing, I would do what's called break connection here. If I wanted to get rid of just that I forgot what it was called. What did I use? Let's look. The solid fractal. If I wanted to get rid of the solid fractal, I would break the connection here at the vein color. So that a lot of students get a lot confused about where they should break it. And it's always, like I said, you think of the one that's controlling it, where this little arrow is. So let's say I just want to get rid of the fractal in this case. I put that in the vein color. If I go to this, it's going to go to the fractal, but I don't want it anymore. I don't like it. So how to get rid of it? To break a connection is you go to the spot where you need to go, in this case, vein color. Right click and hold, or actually you don't need to hold them, sorry, just right click and go break connection, and that'll get rid of it. And I actually didn't think it was going to default back to the red. It was, but that's cool. But it will get rid of that particular thing. And if I hated this completely, which I'm going to leave this alone, I'm not going to do it. But if let's say I want to get rid of the whole thing, I would come all the way back to color, and I'd break connection here. But I'm not gonna bother to do that in this one. Okay, so that's marble. I'm going to go ahead and put, just for the sake of seeing it, I'm going to go ahead and put that fractal that we did on this one, just so we can see what it looked like. And that's kind of what we're doing. You're kind of like judging what these do. So you can see solid fractal is like a cloud thing. It looks like the cloud filter from Photoshop for those that have used Photoshop. You can come in here and mess with threshold, the amplitude. Some of these numbers can be typed past their point, and I'm not sure if this is one of them, but like for example, amplitude. If I come in here and I type in 10, it does. Actually, you can do it. So it only when I was messing with the slider, it only went up to 1. But as soon as I increase that number by i.e. typing, now look, it can go even higher. Now that looks kind of cool. I kind of like the cow look here we're going for here. Ratio. And you see you can get more ratio, kind of blur, and again, that's why I said you kind of got to play with this. You can move it around, ratio frequency, drop the threshold down a little bit, and maybe I'll add some ripples. Why not? Just add some ripples to see what we get. All right. So I mean, again, I'm just messing with numbers, and see what it looks like. And then, like I said, there's a lot of things you can do with these. And like I said, the best way in this particular case is to practice certain things and try them out. Other things that you can do, let's say, for example, you want the overall color to be changed in something, because right now this is just white and black. This particular one I don't think supports changing the black, but we can change. Well, actually we can, but we can do it a different way. So sometimes you can't change the color. Like in here, the marble we could change the color. The fractal by default doesn't let you do that. It's just black and white. So how can we change the color on these? Well, there's often a secondary node called color balance, and you can mess with the colors here as well. Slightly different way of behaving with behavior, but you can do it. We talked about this with image planes, but we can make the default color. Actually, I'm just gonna leave that gray. Actually, but color gain takes the light colors and darkens them. So let's say I wanted this to be pink. I don't know. I'll make this pink. And anywhere it's lighter, it's going to make it that pink color. Let's make it a little lighter pink. So that's color gain. Anywhere it's lighter, it's going to darken to the color that you put into this value. Think of like multiply in Photoshop. Color offset is the exact opposite. Anywhere it's dark, it's going to lighten to whatever color you put in here. So let's say I pick an obnoxious blue color. You can see, and they're mixing now. They're battling for control. So you can see they're mixing on there. That's the alpha gain. All right. So you can see you can have a second level of control. I'm not saying that's pretty, but you can do that. All right. So ideally, you don't want to do just a single one. You probably want to do multiples, but again, try a few out like this. I would recommend first, kind of get an idea what they do, and then play with them. One last property that you can play with. I think it's better left for the 2D one. Yeah, it's better left for the 2D one. We can also play the place texture node. Again, all that is your fake camera here. So if I wanted to rotate this, maybe for example, maybe put it at an angle, kind of get it in there, scale it up or down, maybe repeat it more. You can get in there and do that. So that's that second level projector controls for. So you can get in there and do something like that. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is, honestly, well, let's see if there's any 3D ones first. Sorry, not sign for material. Let's replace this color. Let's look at some of the 3D ones. I think that's pretty good for 3D. Go ahead and try these. I would until you get a little more experience, I would stay away from fluid texture 3D and Mandelbrot 3D. But feel free to give them a shot. It's just they're slightly a little more complicated. But that's, I mean, again, I think on this particular exercise, the best way is to get in there and try them. And again, I'm not going to bloat this video by going through every single one of these. I'm more concerned about how you create connections and break connections between them right now. So let's talk about 2D textures though now, which honestly I'm personally more of a fan of with my background in the video game industry. But you can do 2D connections as well. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this instead of doing 3D. I'm going to click on 2D textures. And you can see there are different kinds here. There's checker, cloth, file, fractals, ramps, and so on. Hands down, the most popular is file, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. I'll click on checker, for example. And here you can see simple checker. This one's pretty easy. And you can have color 1 checker, color 2 checker. And again, I like to make these things look very obnoxious in my demo videos here. I click on this, it's a little slower. There it goes. Green. And I'll do red. Christmassy, why not? Very Christmassy. So you can see I made this checker. And the same thing, same idea. If I wanted the color one, I want the red to be different. I don't want it to be all red. Maybe I come in here and I change its input by clicking on the little input connection. And I can pick a different material. Maybe I will try noise, which is kind of like, honestly, like the fractal, but let's go ahead and do noise. And you can see, there it is. It's the 2D version of fractal. Again, you kind of play with this again and mess with these properties. And if you wanted to, kind of cool looking. You know, if you wanted to, you can come in here and mess with the color balance. Maybe make it back to that purplish color, you know, as such. So I'm color gaining the purple, some purple in it, so all the white areas or the lighter areas become more of the purple color as we go. So very interesting looking shape there. So you can see you can play with these quite a bit. You know, and I can go back and if I wanted to, you know, maybe make the green a different one. And again, it's all about, and this is the key takeaway here, it's all about navigating through these inputs. And then if you don't like something, breaking the connection by right-clicking on the property and going right-click, break connection to get rid of a connection you don't like. Okay? All right, moving on to the next one. I'm going to assign another material here. I'm going to do another 2D texture because I want to talk about this one a lot, is ramp. And if I do ramp, it doesn't look like anything. Ramps are very, very, very valuable. They're used for a lot of things. I used to do a rainbow ramp, now it does like a black and white ramp. How the ramps work is it uses the UVs once again to create a gradient. By default, it defaults to a V ramp. It depends on how your object is shaped. Especially if you've done any modeling, you'll have different results. So you can play with the type right here and get different types of ramps, but in this case, V ramp is definitely going to be the best bet. You can add and take away and manipulate the colors on the ramp. To add a color to the ramp, you just click anywhere, well, not anywhere, but somewhere where you want the color to be. So for example, if I click right here, it'll create a new swatch. These little circle/square things, these are swatches, are colors. And you can switch out between them by clicking on the little circles at the top. If you want to delete a swatch, you click on the little boxes with the X at the bottom. So click, there you go, you can see, and then you can kind of mess with that. Now if you want to change the colors of those swatches, once again you click on the little circles, click on the selected color input, and you change the color accordingly. And right now it's probably at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, I'll move it around in a second. There it goes. So you can see I'm dragging the slider so you can see the bottom. And to drag these, I'm just clicking, holding on the circles, and dragging them around. So maybe I'll make this one more like a cyan color. So like that. And then maybe I'll make the last one, I don't know, like a really lemon yellow color. That's good. So you can see blue, dark blue, cyan, yellow. And I can just drag these around. And if you want to, you can even move them around like this and actually overlap, create gradients, all kinds of things. So gradients are very powerful. I strongly recommend using the ramp to get your gradients in here and mess with things as well. And again, these swatches can be replaced. I'm not going to do it in this case because I've already done it a couple times. But if I wanted to, I can select this darker blue, click the input, and choose something else. Maybe, you know, like I wanted like a noise there or a checker. Or I could have put the ramp inside the checker box pattern over here. So I mean, we covered that quite a bit. So I'm not going to keep going with that. So you can see you can add a lot. Now, the last one I'm going to cover here is I'm going to do one more here before I start diving into other things, and that is hands down the most popular texture. That everyone calls them textures, especially in the video game industry or video game avid players, is file texture. When people think textures, they think file images that go on things, and that is accurate. but it's not the only kind of texture that's out there. But that's what a lot of people think when you say the word texture now, and when you in 3D. So if I click on File, it's going to use a file to replace that and use that instead of the color. So if I click on File now, it's going to turn dark gray because there's no image associated yet, and it's going to have a browser. Now I don't have something handy, so I have to go to the internet. Let's go find a texture for this. I'm just going to go ahead and do a Google search for rock texture. You'll see if you add the word texture on back of a Google search, oftentimes you will find flat orthographic views of the image you're looking for. So I'll do an image search. Maybe I'll even make the settings a little bit larger. Under extraction under tools for some reason. Large. And you can see all these textures here of different rocks. What you do not want is a rock that looks something like this. I mean, if you're planning on making a rock, you don't want these. These are not good textures. These are just pictures of rocks, which might be good reference for modeling or, or just be inspired to kind of how to mimic it. But you don't take these into Maya. So again, I recommend the addition of the word texture on whatever you're searching for, if you want to. So let's say I kind of like the look of this one. I'm going to go ahead and do this one. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up in a new tab and then save it for the purpose of this exercise. Light rock formation, JPEG, and minimize. And I'm going to go ahead and now use this file texture here. So I already assigned the file texture, but I didn't finish the process. I'm going to click on the sphere here, go to the input, goes to the file node, click on the folder icon, and I'm going to navigate to wherever that is kept. In my case, I just saved it straight to the desktop. There it is. Open. And you can see the file texture has been added to that part. Now, there's a long way to go to make this look good. So this is a good start, though. But we can go a lot farther. So that's file textures. They're pretty straightforward. Again, unless you have to manipulate like UVs or something like that, which you shouldn't have to do in this exercise. That's definitely something for a later date. Now, I talked about how I was going to come back, but this is a great time to come back to it. I talked about bump maps. Now, bump maps in the material are how objects can use some sort of texture, 2D or 3D, to mimic surface details. So again, this is great for rocks or grain, like like cracks or things that have rough surfaces, things like that. So I'm gonna do it on this one first, I think. I can come in here, for example, and click on bump map and do the inputs because it doesn't do anything. You have to have an input, and I can pick any one of these inputs. And in fact, I think I'll pick the 2D texture grid, which is just a checker. It's just lines, like a table of lines. And you can see it added a grid of here. Now when you add a bump map, it will default to the bump 2D. You can increase or decrease the value here by dragging the slider. 0 is no change. So if you want nothing, see nothing. Positive number is a kind of a bump in one direction. A negative number is a bump in the other direction. And the further away it gets from 0, the more extreme that bump is. So it's just going to get darker and brighter. Let's say I don't like this bump because it's just lines. It's boring. That's fine. We can come back to the bump map, the base root, the whole bump map. I didn't like it. Right click, break connections. Although there is some cool stuff you can do with this. Go back to the inputs. Maybe I'll try a different one. Let's try bump map noise, or noise, or we can do fractal. Let's do fractal. And you can see right off the bat, super craggy because the fractal is very has lots of gray and white values into it at different levels. So that's how a bump map works. It looks at the gray and white values of the even if it's in color, it looks at the value gray and white value of the whatever the input is, and determines how much from 0 to 1 that influence is affecting it. So you can see if I drag this, maybe tone it down, because it's always, I think 1's always way too intense. I'm gonna do 0.1. You can see it doesn't look so extreme. It's a little bit less rough. It looks nice, I think. Kind of like that. Breaking up the specular highlight, because the bump map will do that for you, and kind of go from there. Now, I can also do that with file textures. So I use this exact same texture for color. I can use the same one for bump. Granted, we should technically make its own bump map. That would be the better way of doing this. But I'm just, for the sake of speed, I'm just going to go ahead and use the same one. So I'm going to go Input, File. I'm going to, problem here is certain things like File. You can see it went straight to the bump map, but it has nothing to input yet. So that's why I did this. It's a little trickier. The value is being controlled by something else. I need to navigate to the folder icon, and I'll show this again because that takes a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and add the light formation on there. You can see it adds it. So where is that? Again, it's buried. Where's the bump map? Okay, so I click here on the input. You're going to get either the file or you're going to get the bump 2D. Now this is where things get confusing for beginners. These arrows will let you move up and down the input node as well. So if you cannot find it, click on, you go to the file, I can't find it, I don't see it up here, click on this arrow right here. This is the input of that. Again, it's a little, yeah, I know. If I want to go back to the file, click here. I want to go back to the bump, click there. They do have a visual graph editor. That's buried a little bit in the Maya, and that's back, like that's definitely the better way to go as you get further along. But for right now, other than that one little caveat, I think this is probably easier. And you can see what I did there as I was talking about that, is I toned down the bump depth. So you can see, or if you want to go the other direction, maybe a negative 0.1. I like the better positive one. But you can see I toned it down. So you can see, making this look more and more like rock as I go. This is kind of largely where we're going. The last thing I want to kind of showcase that you can also do with 2D textures, and what I'll do is I'll do it on this one, is I'm going to go ahead inside a bump map. I'm going to go ahead and make a grid. Because remember that looks like little lines. For some 2D textures, not with file textures, but out of the other ones, you can also play with the UV coordinates of the grid, or whatever's controlling it. In this case, it's a grid, but you could do other things. We talked about this with the 3D textured ones, where you can rotate things around, but if you come into the 2D ones, you can manipulate the UVs. For example, what I like to do is add a little bit of noise, maybe try to see what that looks like, get different results. 0.5, kind of maybe repeat it a little bit, which will have it do more iterations of it. So you can see we can add to that. I'm going to go back to the bump, it's too much. Maybe we'll do negative value, make this little grooves, negative 0.2, for example. So you can see I'm adding little space grooves in there. And again, what I'm doing is I'm going into the input, the actual grid, finding the grid on my bump map, because this is a bump map. You can do this for color too. I'm going to the place 2D texture node, and you can manipulate with these values. So noise will kind of jar it up a bit. Repeat UV, these are the two I use the most at least. Repeat UV will repeat the pattern more. So the increase that number, the more stamps it's using. And if you want to rotate, you can rotate the texture too, which you might get interesting results with that. So you can do a lot of different things with this. So that try playing with the place 2D texture node as well. So I think this is a good breaking point. And like I said, the best thing is to try to experiment with the materials and try different things out. All right, till next time.